Good stuff. All our chat messages disappear when we refresh, and that's a bummer. And local storage is fine and all, but that doesn't make it any easier to chat with other people unless we just keep switching places at the keyboard. And where's the fun in that? So, we said to add the rebase package to your project. Don't mind if I do. Yarn add re-base. Easy enough, and we know that that downloads it, puts it in the node modules folder, and adds it to our list of dependencies in package.json, right? When it's done, there it is, rebase. Right on cue. Beautiful, beautiful. All right, I confirmed that it was listed in package.json. Then we want to update base.js to initialize and export rebase. Hint, export default rebase.create class db. Okie dokie, base.js. Let's see here. If you have the rebase readme open, you may have found this part about configuring it. Example using all of Firebase, and example using only the Firebase database component. Even though this is using require instead of import, you can probably get the idea. We didn't require Firebase, we required Firebase/app. Import Firebase from Firebase/app. So ours is more like the second example, so this is what we want to follow. So we also need to import rebase from rebase. So I bet that is just import rebase from rebase. And we need to import Firebase/database. So for that one, we can actually just say import Firebase/database. We don't actually need to import anything from it, because that will just add it to the Firebase object that we already imported. We don't need to import it as anything. Okay, so those are the imports. Then we initialize our app. We already did that. Right, there's our config, there's our app. So then we make a variable called database. We call firebase.database, pass in that app object. We don't use var, of course, we use const. We're the cool kids. Then we pass that db object to rebase.create class, like it says right there. And my hint was go ahead and export that thing as your default. So I could put export default right here on this line. Or if you wanted to, you could do what they do here. Save it to a variable called base first. That's fine too. Const base equals that. Export default base. Whatever you like. Initialize database and rebase. Sure. Or, yeah, whatever. Configure database and rebase. So let's make sure base.example.js matches our real base.js. So let's update our imports. Because remember, we're not committing base.js because we don't want our API keys to end up on GitHub. There we go. Looks good. Cool. Now what? Sync state. That's where the magic happens. Use base.syncState to sync your messages with Firebase. Allows you to set up two-way data binding between your component state and your Firebase. Whenever your Firebase changes, your component state will change. Whenever your component state changes, Firebase will change. Who got this done? Let's see the hands high. Who got it done? Higher than that, Kindle. Gosh dang it. Maybe? Okay, cool. A little tricky. As you'll see, once you know what to do, it isn't difficult. It doesn't take long. It's just figuring out that first time, decoding the documentation when you're not used to that kind of thing. That's a little harder. But we can do it. So we want to sync our state with a database. So state belongs to a particular component, right? Which component has the state we're interested in? Well, what are we trying to sync? Our messages, right? So where's that? Chat. All right. Sync state. So we should import rebase here. Let's import base from /base. Right? What we exported here. So this is our rebase.create class. That's what we need to call sync state on. So we'll export that and we'll import it here. Then where did you do it? Where did you call sync state? See those hands again. Probably not. Where'd you put it, Catherine? Oh, I thought you had your hand up. I'm sorry. Yeah, that thing. That's exactly what I'm talking about. Okay, component will mount in chat. Anybody else put it somewhere else? Is it in component will mount? Component did mount. Okay, so we got two different options there. Component did mount and component will mount. That's right. So, what are those all about? What the heck do those mean? Let's look at their documentation here. What do they show? They show doing it in component did mount. What are both of those things? What the heck do those mean? Remember a long time ago, we determined that components can be either classes or functions, right? And we said there are rules for when you can make it only a function. Sometimes you have to make it a class. What's one reason you would have to make a component a class? Yeah, Catherine. If you needed state, right? They're called stateless functional components. So if it has state, it can't be a function. The other thing that might make you want a component to be a class instead of a function is that they need life cycle methods. What? Let's look at good old React docs. We've been looking at this main concepts section here before. Here's state and life cycle. What's this life cycle business? I think you have to scroll down a bit to find these things. Okay. We can declare special methods on the component class to run some code when a component mounts and unmounts. Yes, we can. Let's look at the detailed component API reference here. The component lifecycle. Each component has several lifecycle methods that you can use, that you can override to run code at particular times in the process. Here's a diagram to use as a cheat sheet. So when a component mounts, that's when it first loads on the page and actually renders to the DOM for the first time. Then there's when it updates. That's every time it redraws, every time it calls render again because something changed. Then there's unmounting when that component ceases to exist. So there are certain methods that if you add them to your class, will automatically get called at the right time. So this only works, of course, if you've inherited from React component, because that's why they get called at the right time, because the parent class was written to do that. So if you don't make a class that inherits from component, these things will not work. So if you need things to happen at particular times in a component's life, you have to make a class. You can't get by with a functional component. So the constructor runs first, then render runs for the first time, then component did mount. So component will mount comes right before render, component did mount comes right afterward. Similarly, component did update right after render runs because your props or state changed. Component will update right before. Now they no longer recommend using component will mount and component will update. It now gives you a warning in the console if you do that. They still work, but they're considered unsafe for reasons that I haven't fully explored, but they're considered dangerous to use now. So we will use did mount. So component did mount will run right after it renders for the first time. And all we have to do is add component did mount to our class, and it just works. It'll automatically get called at the right time. So component did mount. We'll call sync state from inside there. So looking at the documentation, here's a link to this, by the way. The component lifecycle. So you call base.syncState. And its arguments are, let's look at the documentation. First, the endpoint. It's a string. The relative Firebase endpoint to which you'd like to bind your component state. I don't know what that means, but it's a string, so I'll put a string in there. What you have for lunch today, Logan? Twamages. Very good. All right. Second argument, options. That's an object. Great. We got an object here. The first thing in the object is called context, and it is required. State is also required. Let's make sure we have both of those. Context and state. Okay, what the heck are those? Context. The context of your component. All that means is this. It means the component that whose state you are syncing. So the whole purpose of sync state is to sync the component, sync the state of a particular component. So it needs to know what component. In this context, it's just this, right? This right now is my chat component. And that's the component whose state I want to sync. Second, state, a string. The state property you want to sync with Firebase can be an arbitrarily nested property, a la foo.bar. So the state property you want to sync. Just the string messages. In other words, state.what. You just need to tell it as a string what property on state you're trying to sync with Firebase. Right? State messages. You're just telling it this.state.what. So context is what.state.what. And messages is what.state.what. Okay, that was clearer before I said that. Forget that. Other options, default value, nah. As array, well, that sounds good. Returns the Firebase data at the specified endpoint as an array instead of an object. Well, messages is an array, so that should probably be true. As array, true. Bunch of other arguments. I don't think we need those. Nah. Looks good to me. What's it going to do? Who knows? First of all, let's make sure we do have a database here. Flip over to the database tab. Even though we created one on Thursday, it seems to like to go away if you don't put any data in it. So I don't want Cloud Firestore. That's a beta. Let's scroll down to real-time database, create database. Start in locked mode or test mode. Test mode. Otherwise, no one will be able to read or write to our database. And that is not helpful with what we're trying to do. So we will start it in test mode. Very good. All right. Let's make some doggone messages, shall we? Hi, everyone. It's me with the long email. Let's refresh the page, see if they all go away. They did not. They're back. It worked. Let's go to Firebase. Let's have a look. So here's database. Here's my data. Oh, look, twamages. There are my chat messages. Okay, now that I see what that first string does, twamages was kind of a stupid choice. Probably should have been something like messages. Let's call it messages. Okay, let's get rid of these twamages. Let's try this again. Hey there. Hi there. Yeah, just like that. Now we said this was two-way data binding, right? I make a change in my state, it changes it in Firebase. I make a change in Firebase, it changes in my state. Woohoo. What if I change this from hi there to what do you have to say for yourself, Rich? Unacceptable. What do you have to say for Rich, Kelly? It's a little different at least. So here, I'm going to change it in Firebase and check this out. Go back to chat, and it just changed. I didn't have to hit refresh or anything. It just does it. Holy smokes. It's just that fast. It just works. This is like magic. If we wanted it to be like messages/general or general, because like we're in the general room right now, right? Let's try that. Now there's no messages here. What if I start typing something? What's for dinner tonight, V? Potato and carrot soup. Check it out. Messages. General. 0. There it is. Because I didn't do anything to get rid of them. I didn't delete them. I'm just not syncing with them anymore. But they're still there. Until I do this. I actually manually deleted Twamages, correct. Yep. Pretty cool. Pretty nice. And not very hard once you know how to do it. Let's have a conversation here. Sounds delicious. Refresh the page. Still there. Yeah. It works. Anybody do this any differently? Anybody do anything else with this? Did anybody use component will unmount or did unmount? Will unmount? Anybody do that? You did? Yeah, what'd you do with that? That's a thing too. Will mount and did mount are both things, but will mount has been deprecated. But it kind of makes sense that you would start doing this before you've even rendered the page the first time. Yeah. But we're not. Anyway, tell me what you did with unmount.
I just threw it in there. It didn't remove binding. I thought I needed it.
So component will unmount will run right before the component ceases to exist. And what you did was remove a binding. So when you start to sync state, it'll give you a binding back. And then you could remove that later to stop syncing. So you can stop syncing after you started. So you must have done something a little different up here, right?
Yeah. I had this message, right?
Okay. So.
I think I got this all in the documentation too.
Yeah, it's documented in here somewhere. So notice I'm still at the documentation for sync state. Return value, an object which you can pass to remove binding if you want to remove the listener while the component is still mounted. So you can stop syncing after you've started, but to do that, you have to save a reference to the binding here. So we could say this dot message ref or messages ref or whatever. What do we call it this morning? Messages or message? I called it messages ref. Yeah, that makes sense. That's what you're binding here. So this dot messages ref equals that. So then down here you could say base dot remove binding this dot messages ref. And then you'll actually stop syncing state before the component ceases to exist. Yeah, because once you're unmounted, the thing doesn't even exist anymore. So it's too late. Too late to do something with it. Yeah, so this happens. This is where you would do any cleanup before it goes out of scope. Yeah. We just hadn't done it yet. I mean, it will go away when the component goes away anyway. So it's not necessarily a cleanup that you have to do, but sometimes you'll want to do it. So if we had put this on app, if our messages were on app for some reason and we didn't ever remove the binding, then like even logging out wouldn't stop them from being synced. So even if you logged out, your messages will still be sitting there in the browser, which would be bad for security reasons, right? So sometimes you need to explicitly do that. Here, it's not a bad idea, but it's probably okay if we didn't. Cool. So what do we do? Yeah. It doesn't work. Okay. Just a moment. sync messages with Firebase using Rebase. All right.